President Biden under fire after classified documents were found at his Delaware home. What the president had to say.
Brazil's presidential palace was stormed by protesters following the 2022 election. We break down why and what's next for the Latin American country.
Finally, Illinois becomes the 9th state to ban the sale and distribution of assault rifles. What this means for the state and the country moving forward. And more tonight on Politicat.
It's your politics right now.
Hello, I'm Braden Spate.
And I'm Shravya Pant.
This Saturday, the White House confirmed that 5 more classified documents were found at President Biden's Wilmington home. This discovery comes just 2 days after Attorney General Merrick Garland named Robert K. Hur as special counsel to investigate if there was any wrongdoing. On multiple occasions, classified documents from Biden's time as vice president were found at Biden's home and his private office in Washington, D.C. President Biden had this to say during a news conference in Mexico soon after the story first broke.
I was briefed about this discovery and surprised to learn that there were any government records that were taken there to that office. But I don't know what's in the documents. My lawyers have not suggested I ask what documents they were.
Politicat will continue to keep you updated as this story unfolds.
This Saturday, a Russian missile struck a Ukrainian apartment building in the city of Dnipro, killing at least 40 people. The Kremlin has denied that the strike targeted the residential complex, claiming that the attack was a result of air defense. However, the Ukrainian government is reporting that it was conducted by a Russian Kh-22 missile, the same missile that attacked a Ukrainian shopping mall last summer. On Sunday, President Zelensky addressed the violent attack.
Трусливое молчание, попытка переждать то, что происходит, закончится только тем, что однажды эти же террористы придут и завалят.
The Dnipro strike has proven to be one of the deadliest attacks on civilians in the Russian war against Ukraine. Politicat will keep you updated as rescue efforts are underway.
New details surrounding the George Santos scandal continue to emerge. According to a new report released Monday from the Washington Post, Santos's campaign received money from Andrew Intruder, whose cousin is Russian billionaire Viktor Vekselberg. Vekselberg was sanctioned by the U.S. government due to his involvement in the Russian energy industry. This news comes as Santos is facing more pressure, specifically from the Nassau County GOP, to resign because of reports he lied about the majority of his life and resume on his campaign platform. Notably, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy is not calling on Santos to resign.
Kevin McCarthy has been making headlines as of late. Of note is the fact that it took not 1, not 2, not even 5, but 15 rounds of voting and 5 days of negotiations to get him elected as Speaker of the House, officially succeeding Nancy Pelosi with an evening vote on January 6th. Politicat's Kobe Pottishman breaks down why this monumental role took so long to fill.
The House elects a Speaker, the most powerful position in Congress, every 2 years, usually through just a single vote. However, after the Republican Party underperformed expectations in the midterms and only narrowly won control of the House, their prospects of electing a Speaker were greatly complicated. Kevin McCarthy has led House Republicans since 2019 and has long sought the speakership, but despite the support of most of his conference, 20 far-right holdouts repeatedly denied him a majority, demanding extreme concessions in exchange for their votes. It is impossible for the House of Representatives to function without a speaker. Members can't be sworn in, committees can't be formed, and legislation can't be introduced. After an unsuccessful 14th ballot and a heated negotiation on the House floor with far-right Florida Republican Matt Gaetz, McCarthy narrowly won the speakership on the 15th vote with a total of 216 votes, the exact number he needed to be elected. We still don't know the full impact of this fight. As part of the concessions, House Republicans have since passed legislation cutting IRS funding and restricting immigration and abortion, none of which have any chance of making it through the Democratic-controlled Senate. McCarthy has also promised to slash government spending as part of any future action to raise the debt ceiling and avert default. And because the rules package allows any Republican representative the power to call for a vote to oust the Speaker, McCarthy may well face the entire dilemma again over the coming years.
Coming up, we take a closer look at the migrant crisis at the Texas-Mexico border.
And protesters stormed Brazil's presidential palace. We'll tell you why and talk about what's next for the Latin American country.
Worried about your friend but don't know how to reach out?
You could say how are you or get a fake tattoo. You can ask with an app if it works for you. You could chat with them in VR. It's so good. If you think you should check in, yeah, you should. Whatever gets you talking.
Reach out to a friend about their mental health.
Whatever gets you talking.
Learn how you can help at seizetheawkward.org.
Yo, camping buddy. 7,
Okay.
8,
ready?
9, 10, 11, 12, 13,
Dude, I
14,
thought you were driving.
15.
I thought you were
Amazing.
driving.
Oh, I never said I was driving.
I definitely can't drive. If you're high, just don't drive. It's illegal everywhere. If you feel different, you drive different.
Last week, Brandon met a girl on a dating app. One day after work, he finally found the courage to ask her out. No answer. He started to panic. Was he being too pushy? Maybe it was too...
Hey, sorry I didn't respond. I was driving. I would love to go on a date. How does tonight sound?
Brandon tried to play it cool, but inside he knew. A girl so smart, so responsible. She must be a keeper.
The scenes are all too familiar to us here in the U.S. In Brazil, protesters violently entered the country's Congress, Supreme Court, and presidential palace. Their demands? For the 2022 election results to be overturned. The protest took place early this month on January 8th, just 2 days after the second anniversary of the eerily similar attack on the U.S. Capitol. The brazen assault on the Latin American country has led to condemnation from both sides of Brazil's political spectrum. Politicat's Jonas Blum has been keeping up with this story for us, and he joins us now. So, Jonas, the election was months ago. What is causing these protests now?
Well, from even before the election taking place, Jair Bolsonaro and his Social Liberal Party, which is the right-wing party in Brazil, have been promoting this idea that the election is rigged, quite similar actually to Donald Trump's idea leading up to the 2020 election. Bolsonaro said that it is completely vulnerable, that is their election system. But despite this, immediately after these protests, which I'll note happened on a Sunday, so therefore no one was in their offices, Bolsonaro said that peaceful demonstrations in the form of the law are part of democracy. That kind of sounds like he's supporting the protesters. However, depredations and invasions of public buildings, as occurred today, escape the rule. So he did condemn them, but it almost sounds similar to how Donald Trump reluctantly condemned the protesters on Capitol Hill on January 6th. Lula, who's the current president of Brazil, said, "We will find out who the financiers of these vandals who went to Brasilia are, and they will all pay with the force of law." So he took a much stronger position there.
Right. And so I guess the question now is, what comes next for this country?
Well, I think really we're looking at something very similar to the U.S. Brazil is a strong democracy ever since they transitioned away from an authoritarian state in the 90s. But frankly, we're looking at a lot of Western democracies which are struggling right now. It depends on their media environment, which is skewed towards the right. And we're really going to see in the next election if Jair Bolsonaro's right-wing party is going to maintain power, retake power rather, or if the left-wing party led by Lula, who's actually a former president of Brazil, is going to hold on to power in the country. That'd be the better answer for democracy.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciated having you on. Still looking towards Latin America, the government of Peru extended their state of emergency in Cusco, Puno, the port of Callao, and the capital of Lima on Sunday. This comes after weeks of manifestations which have led to violence and unrest on the streets. Politicat's Micah Sandy has more on why these protests are happening.
It started on December 7 when Peru's Congress removed and arrested the then president, Pedro Castillo, after his attempt to dissolve the legislative branch and install an emergency government just hours before his third impeachment vote. Protesters took to the streets, rallying against the current president. So far, at least 47 people have been killed, and these numbers are from the Peruvian ombudsman. Now, the protesters have 4 principal demands: the closure of Congress, the ratification of a new constitution, the release of Castillo, and the resignation of President Boluarte. Parallel to the protests are marches calling for peace. Anger against Boluarte's government intensified after allegations of unwarranted force against protesters. Human rights groups say the country's police and armed forces are using firearms and dropping tear gas from helicopters. In response, the army said that protesters were found to have weapons and homemade bombs. Peru's top prosecutor's office said that it began an inquiry in regard to the claims. Weinberg Jr. Maria Fernandez was visiting Peru over winter break. Catching glimpses of the protests throughout her visit, here is what she had to say.
When I went to the city that my family's from, which is Arequipa, that was actually one of the cities where the protests were the most violent. For example, people went into the airport and they started destroying property at the airport, which made it impossible for airplanes to arrive at night because there was no lights to direct the planes. My family was like, you have to leave like before the 4th because it was known. I don't know how people know this, like how this message got across, but it was known that the protests were going to start again on the 4th, and there was just no way that I was going to be able to leave the city and get back to the U.S. for my classes.
The Inter-American Commission on Human Rights says that it opposes the violence erupting from both sides, calling instead for dialogue. At this time, protesters refused to speak to Boluarte. Now, we await the effects of Boluarte's state of emergency. That's all for me. Back to you at the desk.
President Biden's visit to the Texas-Mexico border last Sunday came at a politically charged moment for the country's immigration policies. More than 5 million immigrants have illegally attempted to cross into the U.S. since Biden took office in January 2021. Politicat's Ananya Chugh is live to tell us more.
I'm here live from the Multicultural Center here at Northwestern, the home of Alianza, which is the Latin American Student Association here on campus. Biden has sidestepped immigration issues in many regards, making little effort to push Congress to tackle these issues. Ahead of Biden's visit to the border last week, the Biden administration officially expanded the parole program for migrants coming from Haiti, Nicaragua, and Cuba. Under the new program, the U.S. intends to accept 30,000 people coming from these 4 nations every month for the next 2 years. Those who do not come under this program may be expelled to Mexico under Title 42.
And that's what many of our ancestors did. And it's no surprise that it's happening again today. We can't stop people from making the journey, but we can require them to come here, that they come here in an orderly way under U.S. law.
Critics of Biden's policies feel that despite his visit to El Paso, the epicenter of the southern border crisis, Biden did not effectively tour government facilities where immigrants are being held and processed after crossing the border illegally. Biden told reporters that the administration will be gaining more effective resources for Border Patrol agents. Back to you at the studio.
Money is on the minds of many as we begin 2023, with nearly 80% of Americans saying they see economic difficulties in the year ahead. Those numbers are coming in from a Gallup poll conducted earlier this month. Jeremy Fredericks is in the studio with an economic outlook. Jeremy, good evening.
Braden, good evening. For the last year, the Federal Reserve has been continuously raising rates to slow down inflation. This higher inflation has meant that groceries, housing, and plenty of other things cost more. The Fed raised rates to a range between 4.25% and 4.5% last month, meaning that interest that needs to be paid back is going to cost more. That's the highest level in over a decade and a half. I spoke with Northwestern economics professor Martin Eichenbaum about this balancing act.
Started raising rates too late in an effort to slow the economy down and therefore bring inflation down. We are definitely making progress on inflation, but it's still pretty high.
Inflation, as he mentioned, is still high, but it falls from its peak in June. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reports the rate was at 6.5% for last month. People are still feeling the effect. The high costs mean that people are ending up with less money to spend on goods and services. But there are some positives in the economic outlook. Unemployment remained low throughout 2020. It's been under 4% for most of the year, with December's numbers falling to 3.5%. Not only is that the lowest, that number matches rates from before the pandemic. There were 100,000 job cuts in the tech industry, according to the publication The Challenger. Apple executives say they would stop hiring new people this year, and that's because Apple, like so many other tech companies, took on extra hires during the pandemic, but now they have to course correct. Here's what Professor Eichenbaum had to say about that.
But the employment levels are way up. And so it shouldn't be entirely surprising that not only are they not hiring new people, they're laying off a lot of people.
Economists are hopeful that inflation will continue to fall and that the price of everyday staples will decrease throughout the year. Shravia, back to you.
Thanks, Jeremy. Coming up, how an Illinois law plans to keep assault rifles off the streets.
Go Politics takes center stage with its upcoming mayoral election. Stay tuned.
At Northwestern University, we are pioneering innovation and achieving excellence across every imaginable discipline. At Northwestern University, the possibilities are endless.
Welcome back. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker signed an assault weapons ban into state law last week. The law bans the sale of weapons that automatically load the next bullet after a shot. This includes semi-automatic rifles and pistols with detachable magazines. This comes after the devastating shooting at Highland Park, which claimed the lives of 7 people and left 49 injured. Though Illinois is now the 9th state to pass a ban of this magnitude, it's a move that comes with a set of controversy, as at least 74 state sheriff's departments have vowed to defy the ban. Politicat's Sadie Frankel joins us to break down the statewide and national implications of a ban of this size. Sadie?
Thank you. The new legislation bans the sale, delivery, and purchase of dozens of assault-style weapons, implements a registry for all existing weapons, and establishes a cap for the number of magazines owned by a private individual. The 4th of July parade mass shooting in Highland Park last summer caused a new push for stronger gun legislation. The shooting killed 7 people and injured 48. The ban is seen as a victory for state Democrats. Governor Pritzker has been working toward an assault weapon ban for the past 4 years. Illinois is now the 9th state with an assault weapon ban. In the U.S., every state has different measures to prevent gun violence. Because of this, results of gun control, like Illinois' assault weapon ban, can be difficult to gauge. Laurel Harbridge-Young is a Northwestern professor of political science. She says when looking at the state's legislation, it is important to see what its neighbors have passed.
That being said, though, I think an important part to note is that because this is a state-by-state kind of piecemeal approach, is that the extent to which people can purchase guns in Indiana or other surrounding states in Illinois, it's going to limit the effectiveness of a type of policy like this because of the ease with which people can cross state to state.
At the time of the Highland Park shooting, the city had an assault weapons ban, but the shooter still purchased the weapons legally in Illinois. Professor Harbridge-Young says this shows the issue of jurisdiction within gun legislation. As you can see in red on this map, Illinois is surrounded by states without assault weapon bans. And within Illinois, some local officials say they won't follow the legislation. According to ABC News, sheriffs in all of the counties in red on the map have released statements saying that they won't enforce this ban. Here's what Young had to say about the sheriffs opting to defy the ban.
In a technical sense, counties do not have the ability to kind of supersede a state law, like they're under the jurisdiction. But I think what it's a little bit of kind of signaling, so similar to kind of a kind of messaging politics or something, telling our constituents like, you know, I'm on the side of opposition to this legislation. I think that this infringes on, you know, Second Amendment rights.
Now, since the start of 2023, there have been 25 mass shootings in the United States as of January 16th. Many Democrats nationwide seek to introduce stricter gun legislation at the national level to reduce the impact of gun violence in America. Let's hear from Yang one more time.
Guns can come from one state into another state. And so this does suggest that there, is a need for federal legislation if you want to kind of fill the gaps of where state legislation is missing.
The federal Bipartisan Safer Communities Act passed in Congress last summer and is the most significant federal gun control in the last 10 years. But advocates say there's still more progress to be made. That's all from me. Braden, Shravya, back to you.
Sadie, for your excellent reporting. And tune into next week's show as Sadie will be back to craft a more comprehensive and extensive report.
Keeping things here in Illinois, we look ahead to the city of Chicago, where the race for city mayor is heating up. With only 6 weeks left until the election, 8 candidates are up against incumbent Lori Lightfoot as policing and education become key topics this election season. Politicat's Luis Castaneda sat down with Medill professor Peter Slevin, who's teaching a reporting class on this upcoming election, to give us a preview of what to expect.
Thank you so much, Professor Slevin, for accepting this interview and being here tonight. I'm going to ask you a few questions. Let's get started.
Cool.
So, as you know, a candidate must receive over a majority of the votes in February's election in order to win. That seems a more, easier said than done type of situation. What do you anticipate happening in this election based on polling and the candidate's likeness? Will this go to a runoff election in April?
It will almost certainly go to a runoff. There are 9 candidates, and the odds of one of them emerging, especially as no one has emerged so far, to get 50% plus one are very, 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 very small. You have a large field of candidates challenging the incumbent, Lori Lightfoot, each one trying to emerge as her main rival. If she doesn't get to the runoff, of course, that's a whole nother story, but if she gets to the runoff, everybody wants to be the one who is not the incumbent, which is very much who she was 4 years ago when she won her runoff by 3-1.
So we're now seeing past supporters actually turn against the mayor, right? One, Jesus Chuy Garcia, even vying for her seat. And he's seeming to be succeeding in that. What will her opponents be looking to highlight when assessing her time as mayor?
The biggest issue on everyone's mind in Chicago is crime and especially violence. The numbers are actually not quite as awful as they were last year or the year before last, but they're bad by any standard. They're troubling. It has proven to be right now a problem that no one has been able to figure out how to solve. So her critics are attacking Lightfoot for not doing enough to reduce violent crime, and they're also going after her personality. She comes across to so many of her critics as overly aggressive, overly assertive, even a little bit mean. There have been any number of hot mic episodes and even open mic episodes where she has gotten some attention, shall we say, for her sharp tongue.
Right. That's always hard to keep in as a politician, I'm sure.
And so you have one of the things that's kind of interesting. There was a forum over the weekend downtown held by 35 different women's groups. You had some of her competitors saying they would be collaborative. Their goal is to get along. The way to change things and fix things is to have a softer approach. Lightfoot says, this is who I am. And look at my record. Look at where we're making investments. Look at what we're trying to do. Look at what we've done. She said, other people on the stage try to imagine what it would be like when they are mayor. Look at who I already am. She's saying that the facts will support me.
Right, and that's almost in the reason how she won her election in 2019. She was seen as a challenger. Right, the Chicago Tribune attributes Mayor Lightfoot's success in getting elected in 2019 to the Burke scandal that saw her opponents connected to the extortion case in City Hall. Well, can her message of fixing a broken and corrupt Democratic machine, as she has said, win her another term, given controversies that you just stated?
The machine is largely broken. The machine of Richard J. Daley and all the way through to some extent to Richard M. Daley, his son, doesn't exist in the way it did before, where when you had patronage jobs turning into votes, votes turning into patronage jobs. She was successful in 2019 because she ran as an outsider. And what happened, the way it worked, was she was going up against better-known opponents. She got into a runoff against Tony Preckwinkle, the chair of the Cook County Board, and people saw her as a fresh face, and Preckwinkle as older, a little more tired, a little less exciting, and she won 3-1.
Exactly. Do we have time for one more question? Awesome. So let's talk about some of the other candidates. Candidate Paul Vallis, he's taking a more proactive approach in the topic of policing, while Jesus Chuy Garcia is a proponent of the consent decree amid reforming police. Which approach do you think might appeal to Chicago voters, and why?
Well, there are a lot of different Chicago voters, and these candidates are trying to find slices of the electorate that will carry them into the runoff. To win, you have to have a coalition in Chicago, which is roughly 1/3 white, roughly 1/3 black, and 1/3 Hispanic. And of course, within each of those groups are plenty of other categories. When it comes to policing, Lightfoot is getting it from both sides. She's getting it from the police department. The Fraternal Order of Police has endorsed Paul Vallis. They quite dislike Lori Lightfoot, as does the Chicago Teachers Union. On the other hand, plenty of people who live in neighborhoods that are beset by gun violence say, can't you do more? So you have Vallis positioning himself, I guess you could say, to her right, but everyone emphasizing that policing needs to be better, and as you say about Chuy Garcia, that the consent decree that requires better policing tactics and techniques from the police department also needs to be enforced.
And with a big city as big as Chicago, I'm sure police is a very important topic. Well, thank you so much, Professor, for your time. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thanks for the questions.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Louis, and keep watching Politicat for more in-depth reporting on this election in the weeks ahead.
Finally, on Monday, President Biden delivered remarks at the National Action Network's annual MLK Day breakfast. Politicat's Washington correspondent Logan Shijano has more.
President Joe Biden.
President Biden voicing his support for the Black community at the National Action Network's annual MLK Day breakfast. From the economy,
Black small businesses are the engines and the economic glue of any community. I need not tell anybody in this room.
To the courts.
We have appointed more black women to the federal circuit courts than every other president in American history combined.
At Biden's third ever appearance at the breakfast, he was praised for becoming the first sitting president to deliver a sermon inside Martin Luther King's church in Atlanta on Sunday.
If there's any president that should have been honored to speak at Ebenezer, it should have been the man that had our back.
Don't we all feel very fortunate to be here today?
Alongside former Speaker Nancy Pelosi and the King family, Biden vowing to continue the fight for equality for all Americans.
The path is clear. To go forward, we need to go together.
And shortly after Biden's remarks, groups around the country, including here at Episcopal High School, came together to put his message into action.
The scale of this and seeing all of it all at once is incredible.
1,400 students, faculty, and volunteers partnering with Alive and Islamic Relief USA.
So Islamic Relief was founded following the food crisis in Africa, so we have a very strong interest and priority on food insecurity around the world.
Packing over 4,000 food boxes for roughly 17,000 of their neighbors in Alexandria.
We'll grab a bag of rice and flour, sugar, jelly, cans of tuna, what else? Pasta, lentils.
Addressing a growing issue in the area.
In 2019, we're serving about 400 households a month. Now we're serving 4,000 a month.
All on a national day of service.
It's a day on, not a day off. This is how we affect change and how we give people hope.
From that podium to this production, following in the footsteps of a civil rights king.
He preached nonviolence and love for your enemies, and I think an event like this really goes a long way toward satisfying living up to those principles.
In Washington, Logan Schijano, Medill News Service.
Thanks, Logan. Keep up the great work in D.C.
Well, that's all the time we have tonight for Politicat.
We'll be back next week to take a closer look at the news and politics that make headlines.
It's been your politics
right now.